Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on from which part of the world you are joining us today. I'm Norma Goodwin, VP of Business Development at Indegene. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Juanjo Francesch, a visionary leader in the life sciences industry. Juanjo is the Global Chief Information Officer of Human Health IT and Managing Director at MSD Czech Republic. In his current role, Juanjo drives innovation and collaboration, harmonizing the realms of business and IT, ensuring seamless product implementation on a global scale. Juanjo strongly believes in the power of diverse perspectives, and he actively cultivates an environment that fosters diversity and inclusion. Thank you, Juanjo, for joining us today. Please take it from here.
Thank you very much, Norma, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you also to Indegene for inviting me to share my thoughts today. So what I thought I will be talking about today is about technology transformation in the pharma industry. And what I will be saying today by no means represent the views of my company. It just represents my opinions and as well as my experience during the last 20 or 30 years that I made a career in the industry. I'll be talking first. Let me talk about change first, and that's the core of why technology needs to transform, right? Technology continues to evolve every single day. I promise not to talk about Gen AI, but I will now. Because it's the latest example of a change that is happening outside of the industry that is actually driving quite a bit of investment. It was AI before, now it's Gen AI, and it will continue to change. And we are all looking at use cases of relevance to actually apply the technology. So technology continues to change, but it's not only that changes, it's also the way that we interact with the technology and the way that we work. Back in the 90s, the Agile Manifesto was created to drive a different way of creating software, and yet this has evolved into a way of working that many companies use, not only to create software, but also as a way of working to create marketing or digital campaigns. There is also lately, we have been exposed to the change from going to the office every single day, right? To not going to the office at all because of COVID, and then moving on to this current hybrid model where some companies are choosing to return to the office nowadays. There is also a change based on your company. Companies do have a life cycle, and that impacts the resources that you have to actually address technology transformation. There are companies, and you all can think about yourself and your own company, where you might be lucky enough to have a rich portfolio of new chemical entities that allow you to be in the growing phase of a company. But you might be also in a company where you don't have that many blockbuster, growth is limited, and therefore the resources that you have available do change. The external environment changes for all of us constantly. In the US, we had the Inflation Reduction Act lately that is putting pressure on how companies are looking at pricing and access. And that's no news for someone who is sitting in Europe, where the pricing pressures and the controls and the approval procedures have been a constant during the many years. Therefore, your company is pressed to change. We are pressed to change. And what matters a lot, in my experience, is what it is your company position, meaning where are you, which resources do you have available, and what's the burning platform to change? Because sometimes if you want to address a technology transformation, but you don't have burning platform to change, then you will have to address that topic at some point. In some other cases, you definitely have a burning platform where there is a clear need to evolve the systems in your company, and it can be because of a cybersecurity event, it can be because a number of incidents that are happening because of reliability in your infrastructure. Whatever the reason is, whatever your position is as a company, that will impact the way in which you need to look at your transformation. The technology will continue to evolve, and we live in a time where, I think it was about 20 years ago, Nicholas Carr published that article around IT doesn't matter, and his thesis was, hey, because of the availability of technologies through the cloud and through the software as a service, everyone can have more or less the same software, and therefore the technology does not matter. And to a point, he's right. He's still right today, and to a point, he's completely wrong. It is true that as a company, every company has access to roughly the same technology, yet the way that you use it, the way that you integrate it, the way that you implement the processes on it, the way that you seek business outcomes is essentially different, depending on A, where you are as a company, and B, what are the objectives that you are pursuing. And so even if the availability is more or less similar, and the external environment is also similar to all of us, the life cycle of your company is actually super important to determine how you will have to address a technology transformation. It is also important to understand where are you in terms of your technology landscape. I will say you can characterize that into basically 3 or 4 archetypes, if you like. If you are lucky enough to be in a startup where there is nothing done, then you are starting from a green field, and therefore you can benchmark yourself to see what others are doing, and because of the easy availability of software, you can actually address a transformation where your objective is adoption as quickly as possible, but also being very mindful of how you will control that growth just to prevent chaos in the end. I've been in companies where you can have an environment that is extremely globalized, and therefore any change that you introduce is not focused on a single country, but instead it's focused on a process that changes. And therefore, when you address that change and you want to evolve the platform, the complexity tends to be higher in the sense of you are going to do it for all the countries at once, but at the same time, it's kind of easier just because you do it once and then you move forward from there. I've been in situations where you encounter a highly fragmented company, and I'm saying fragmented company in terms of the technology landscape. And in those cases, your approach is going to be different. And of course, there is something in between being highly globalized or highly fragmented. It doesn't really matter where you are when you address technology transformation. What matters is that you understand where you want to go and what it is that you need to address in order to make the right thing. In other words, as a technology executive, you have to have an opinion. You cannot say, oh, it's a business decision to drive the technology agenda. In my opinion, I think that needs to be driven by us, the technologists, and of course, together with the business. You need to understand what are the business outcomes that you pursue, but also you need to have an opinion, and therefore you need to understand the technology as well. In my experience, I've been in companies where we had a highly globalized environment where even process owners were assigned. And so in that scenario, introducing technology transformation was relatively easier, just because the number of stakeholders that I had to align when I had an opinion that something had to change was less. And therefore, decision-making was faster, and standardization was a lot broader. That has pros and cons, to be honest. The pros are you implement faster. The data structures that you can define are well established from the very beginning, and therefore that helps you to then, when you want to use data and analytics, you have easier structures, easier data governance, and therefore it is easier to aggregate data to extract the value from these global processes. If you are smart enough, then you also learn from from the analytics that you run on your data, and therefore you can then raise conclusions, use intelligence in a much more efficient way, which leads to better results from algorithms and all that. The cons are, of course, that you find sometimes the global process never works at the local level, right? We all have seen that, and therefore how you find that balance is sometimes complicated. I've been in a company where local, I will be extreme, local didn't matter. Again, I'm being extreme, where we just push for the global processes, and that was the end. It had advantages, but it has disadvantages. It is important also, I've been also in a highly globalized company as well, where we didn't have the resources. And resources are a very important thing, because that drives how much patient you can be, meaning, can you do transformation in 3 years, or you need to do it in 1 year because you will have to lay off 40% of your employees, and your level of investment is going to be down by 20, 30, or 40%. If you are in that situation, change management goes out of the way real quick, right? Just because you don't have the time. And therefore, the amount of resources that you have available actually will drive a lot the speed in which you introduce the technology transformation. If you are in a luxury situation where, hey, you don't really have a burning platform, you don't really have a need to change tomorrow, and you have resources, well, you just won the lotto, right? So lucky you, and congratulations. You will have then, in that scenario, what you will have is a big issue of change management, because if there is no burning platform, there will be a lot of people that will be asking you why you need to change. And that's a question that you get, and it's a question that you have to have a solid answer for. So those are very broad areas where you need to be looking at. It is very important when you arrive, or when you decide that you need to run a wide technology transformation program, it is very important that you understand where you are, because that's your starting point. And by understanding where you are, what I mean is what it is your technology landscape, what resources do you have, which stakeholders do you need to handle, how you want to, how many resources you have, and therefore what it is the speed in which you can execute or you need to execute. And super important then, once you have all that, is where are you going, and what it is your North Star. How do you think, or where do you think you need to arrive? Because if you don't define these things, and I know that sounds very basic, but if you don't define these things, you always end up in trouble. Where in the marketing technology space, I always benchmark myself with the fast-moving consumer goods company. And I know that they do things that maybe I cannot do in pharma because of the regulations and compliance, and that's fine. I implement things that are compliant, and I don't do things that are illegal, of course. But having said that, fast-moving consumer goods tend to drive the technology agenda for marketing technology in a faster way than we do in pharma. And that's fine, because that helps me to learn from them. And I'm constantly looking at them as the best example of how I think things will be in pharma in 2-3 years. And that's super important, because I said at the very beginning, I need to understand what are the business outcomes that I'm pursuing, because I need to remind constantly my organization, hey, the important thing is not the technology, it is the business outcomes. But at the same time, I'm a technologist. If I do not understand the capabilities of blockchain or the capabilities of Gen AI or ChatGPT, you call it as you like, if I don't understand that, then it will be very difficult for me to guide my business. And it will be very difficult for me to actually be, for me and my organization, to actually be one step ahead. Because that's what I try to be. And I'm not saying that I get there all the time, sometimes, but not all the time. I try to be just one step ahead. because when the business comes to me and say, hey, we're thinking and doing X, I love it when the systems are ready to go, because it's the best pleasure for me. It's like, oh, I saw that coming. We've done these investments. You can actually use the systems already to do that today. The area that more philosophically, I want to say something that I will always say to my organization, and that has worked for me and my organization in many occasions. And it's not very sexy, but I always tell them, be dependable. And I know that being dependable doesn't sound like the most innovative thing to do, but always remind, in technology, 70, 80% of the time, what we do is keep things running. And you will not be able to talk about the strategy. You will not be able to talk about innovation if the systems are not working. If the laptop of the person or the stakeholder you are talking to is having issues, that will be your conversation. It won't be about the strategy. It won't be about which capabilities do we need to develop further. It won't be about the impact that a given technology can have on your business outcomes. It will be about the laptop of that person. And therefore, and that applies, of course, not only to the laptop, but to any system and that you can take it. Being dependable actually builds trust. And by being dependable, I don't mean to say yes to everything. What I mean by being dependable is to say yes when it's yes and no when it's no, and then stick to it. And when you are going to make a mistake or you're going to fail, you say it before it happens, if possible, because that builds trust. And once you have trust, then you can have conversations about strategy, you can have conversations about how you can do things better, which leads into much more interesting discussions and in a much more engaging environment for yourself and for your employees. And so when you have that feeling of, hey, we're having all these conversations, this level of engagement with the business, then you start to become proud. And I'm not talking about myself only. I'm talking about the entire organization. And when you are proud about what you do, you are more dependable because you don't like mistakes, right? And so you just generated a flywheel, which is very positive, between being dependable to being trusted, to being innovative, to being proud about what you do. That flywheel continues and reinforces being dependable. And that's a core thing in any IT organization. It's not fancy to be dependable, but it's actually the root for being trusted and being a business partner, and then having the business having conversations with you about what next, which possibilities we have in the future. When you do that, I tend to think about this in 4 different areas, and I hope you are noticing I'm not talking about technology at all, because technology is just a piece of hardware or software, but it's all about people in the end. And so you have to work in 4 areas that I think are super important. One is what it is the culture that you want. In that flywheel I described it a second ago, mistakes are acknowledged and there are learnings. Otherwise, you cannot improve being dependable. And therefore, you need a culture where people is not afraid. People make decisions to make things better. They understand what that means, meaning which things are the indicators of better. And therefore, they take those decisions. And then when they do mistakes, they ask for help to correct them. And those mistakes are not being penalized, but they are also not rewarded, of course. But at the same, there is no issue. Everybody does mistakes, and therefore you correct from them. And that's the type of culture that you want. Otherwise, people does not speak up, and things do not improve. You need to have also the incentives for that to happen. Meaning, when people make a decision, they need to understand what are the key objectives that you are pursuing. And therefore, you need to align the KPIs, the performance evaluations that you have every year, the priorities of the business into your technology agenda and your transformation. If you do that together with culture, then what you have is people that are starting to make the decisions that you need them to make without yourself, in this case, without me. I run an organization at the moment with several hundred of people, employees, who make decisions every day. And of course, they do all these decisions way better than I do. And therefore, it is important that they feel empowered to do that, but also that they know which are the priorities. And to that, that's the third element. I mentioned culture, I mentioned incentives. The third element is how you run processes and governance. I tend to be much more, people over process type of person, and I prefer to have a conversation where decisions are being made over a form that follows a flow where people, puts a ticket and then the ticket goes away. But that's my personal opinion. It is important. What it is important is that you apply certain processes and governance in a clear way. And then the last bit is how you organize yourself, right? Because in any organization, the clarity is important. Who is my boss? It's a very important question that every employee has. And I try to avoid these organizations where you have, dual or triple reporting lines, because that doesn't drive clarity. And I think for people to execute, the easier it is to understand the organizational model, the easier it is for you to then define what are the incentives, the processes and governance, and then the underlying and most important thing, the culture. So that's these 4 areas. You can choose how you want to start with them. I always like to start with the organization because that simplifies. And then everybody can follow based on the organization. The area where I don't have an answer is how good looks like. I wish I would. I don't think that is good. Okay. What I think is the change will happen always around you, and therefore, because change happens all around you, and it's social changes, it can be technology changes, ways of working changes, the life cycle of your company, etc. Because all that is constantly happening. The only thing you can aspire to is to have the metrics that measure whether you are improving or not. And therefore, it is the journey that matters. It's not the objective that matters. You have your North Star, and then you start measuring what it is important to you, whatever that is. And therefore, and as you see that there is progress in those metrics, that's how you measure that you're going in the right path. I don't think there is an end to this, particularly because we are all human, and therefore perfection does not exist in a human organization. Always something is going on, always. But because change happens always, you will always be adjusting. What matters is the journey, not the destination. So to recap a little bit, change is constant. I think everybody says that all the time, and it's true. You need to know where you are and the resources and the need for change that you are pursuing. You need to know where do you want to go, and for that, benchmarking is to me is a super important tool. And then you have to work on culture, organization, incentives, and processes and governance, and enjoy the ride. That's the most important thing. If you have fun doing all this, you're doing the right thing, and your team will enjoy that. With that, thank you, Norma. Back to you. If you have any question, I'll be glad to take it.
Thanks, Juanjo. We do have a couple of questions. Really do appreciate your insights. Change definitely is constant, and I know you well enough to know you do have fun.
Yes, I try.
You talked about how technology and business strategy are intertwined, and how you anchor your team on business outcomes. Can you talk about or share your secret mantra for successfully navigating the complex intersection between business and IT?
Yeah. So first you have to be comfortable with failing in that one, because sometimes I screw up like everybody else. No, having said that, I don't think about, in many occasions I've been tempted to create a technology strategy, and I did it years ago, but now I don't do that. What I do is I try to embed technology into the business strategy, and I think that's the core. When you understand what are the priorities of your business, and then you say, okay, we can support this priority or this strategy with this technology. I think that is what drives alignment across not only the business but also the technologist. Having said that, I am an executive in technology, and therefore I need to understand what are the business outcomes that the business is pursuing, but I also need to understand what's happening outside. And by that I mean not only Gen AI, but am I going to invest in quantum? And the answer is no, by the way. I'm not investing in quantum for now, but I did look into that. And I did look into blockchain, into many areas. And so having an opinion of what technology might be useful in the future for us, and then deciding when you will need to either reevaluate your decision or start investing to build a capability. It is important because the business relies on you to actually have that opinion. And if you don't, they will go to consulting firms and will get all sorts of opinions. But you have to have an opinion. And therefore, if you are able to understand what business outcomes are being pursued today and maybe in the future, and then the technology capabilities of today and the ones that are emerging, if you combine these two, then you might be able to be sometimes one step ahead, which is always what I try to do, to the extent that I can, so that when they want to do something, it's actually possible. Did that help?
It does. It helps a lot. So you talked about having a North Star to help
Yeah.
the organization see where you're going. How do you share a common vision of technology transformation and its impact on the company's future from the C-suite to the front lines?
Yeah. So we do actually in my current job and in others, we've done exercises to understand, okay, from a business standpoint, which capabilities do we think will be important in the next 2-3 years? And to do that, we use a combination of methods. One is you talk to different companies, sometimes in pharma, more often than not outside of pharma, and I mentioned fast-moving consumer goods companies. They are a good reference to understand which capabilities are they driving, because eventually I will need the same. You also can talk to technology companies such as, I don't know, I'll mention Salesforce, for instance, that I'm sure many people uses, and then understand what they are seeing, what is on demand from them, because typically this might be something that I might need to do, not necessarily with them, but it might be something that you need to do. With that, you understand the capabilities. Sometimes you need to also stop and then say, okay, what it is the emerging tech, what it is my current architecture, how I will need to not only adapt the architecture, but also the portfolio of systems and which technical capabilities I will have to develop. And then, and probably you need to do that kind of independent, but also connected, because some of the areas in these capabilities might not really need a lot of technology investment. Others, like quantum, and I'm picking on this one, there's no one in the business that is asking me to do anything about quantum nowadays. It's probably because it's too early. So having these two combine and then review it every 2-3 years, I think that helps. And then on a more short-term scenario, what we use a lot is what are the business outcomes that the business is pursuing, and then you have this quarterly business review where you share the OKRs and you actually agree on the OKRs, and then you define what is the next set of activities that you are actually going to pursue. And that helps for the constant short-term alignment then that you need to have. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your experiences today. We really appreciate your time as well as those who are attending the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.